Today I'm painting the Alchemist Elite from the Grimcoven board game. There aren't many interesting features for this miniature other than the bright red flame that he's conjuring in his right hand. Therefore, I'm going to focus more on this aspect of the paint up. I'm going to front load the tutorial with the painting of the red flame. This means that the painting progression for this video will be a little out of order from how I actually painted it, but the full painting tutorial will come together by the end. Welcome to Treehane Miniatures. Rather than painting a standard red, orange, and yellow flame like I've done so many times in the past, I've decided to attempt painting a pure bright red flame. I'm modeling this flame's appearance after burning lithium. This still has a glint of orange in the center, but mostly it's a pure red flame. After priming the model with a dark blue paint and primer in one, I get to work with the airbrush. I'm using a dark red airbrush paint, which I thin only with a little flow improver. This part of the model preparation has nothing to do with the painting of the flame, but rather I'm establishing where the glow of the bright red flame would impact the alchemist's clothing. This is the easiest way to paint the OSL glow from the flame on the miniature. Regardless of what color flame I'm painting, I almost always begin with a completely opaque layer of white paint. This ensures that the flame looks as hot and bright as possible. This does present a challenge when attempting to paint a pure red flame, however. Experience has taught me that trying to paint bright red OSL directly over a white base coat can often result in a very pink finish. This is particularly true because the red paint is usually substantially thinned down to maintain the brightness of the white underneath. So I'm trying something a little different by applying fluorescent yellow as a full undercoat for the red flames. Fluorescent yellow is a common ingredient for my usual flame recipe, but in this case I will completely cover it with the subsequent red colors. My hope is that the yellow underpainting will make the final red hue appear more vibrant. I also expect the yellow layer to give the red flames a slight orange internal glow, rather than the pink flavor that I've experienced when painting translucent red directly over white. The next step is to paint over every bit of fluorescent yellow with fluorescent red. This fluorescent red ink doesn't have the opacity to cover the yellow paint completely, and I know that from the start. My goal with this is to get the fluorescent red in the recesses and lower parts of the flames. This will make those parts of each flame look a little brighter. I'll finish up painting over the exposed yellow with a darker red in the next step. Despite its obvious transparency, I did expect this fluorescent red to provide a little more coverage after 3 coats. I keep applying it until I'm satisfied with the coverage in the recesses, then I move on to the darker red ink. For the darker red bits of flame, I'm using crimson red ink. I'm using this to darken the outermost flames. This is a usual approach to painting flames. Flames get darker the further away from the source they are. In this case, I also need to use this red over the exposed yellow regions. For the innermost parts of the flame and any recesses, I'm fine with a glowing orange appearance. If I use this dark red ink too aggressively, I may kill the overall brightness of the flame, and I don't want to do that. The final look of the flame may not be exactly what I envisioned before beginning, but I am very happy with the results. The final step for the flame is to darken the tips a little with transparent burnt umber ink. The great thing about using transparent inks for new painting ideas like this is that I can progress very slowly, taking baby steps toward the final look I want. Building up the opacity of transparent inks in several layers is like having a built-in safety measure. It helps keep me from abruptly screwing up my minis. I'm sure that once I get a little more comfortable with this process, I'll want to go a little faster. For now, this is perfect since I only have one small flame to paint. Now that the flame is done, we need to paint its glow on the nearby clothing. We started with a simple airbrush space layer of dark red. Now I need to intensify this red layer with a brighter red paint. I paint this brighter red within the established layer. I want this to brighten the sections of red layer that are directly facing the flame. The airbrushed red layer fades naturally into the surrounding colors. I don't want this new, more vibrant red layer to disrupt that. Next, I pick out the most intense reflections with titanium white. This is reserved for edges, prominent folds, and the area of clothing closest to the flame. I also use this to add reflections to any shiny objects, such as the crown of thorns, chains, and dangling metallic objects. Then I return to bright red one last time to paint over these white highlights. We are finally done with the flame and the flame's glow, so now we go back in time to bring the rest of the model up to speed. While I had the airbrush set up, I used two colors in addition to the dark red to establish the blue-gray of the Alchemist cloak. The first color is dark neutral gray. I cover most of the midnight blue primer with this, but I make sure to leave some midnight blue visible in the recesses as the darkest shadow color. I'm also careful not to cover the red OSL layer that I painted immediately before this. The final step with the airbrush is to spray Iron Wolf as a preliminary highlight color. I spray this from a much steeper angle than the dark neutral gray that came before. I want this character to appear as though he exists in a very dark setting. Wolf Gray is the ultimate highlight color for the cloak. I reserve this color for the most prominent folds and creases in the cloth and parts that are facing directly upwards, such as the Alchemist's left shoulder. I base coat the Alchemist's flesh, the skeleton on the ground, and the ground itself with German Camel Black Brown. Then I use a mix of German Camel Black Brown and Necrotic Flesh as the mid-tone color for all of these features except for the earth beneath the character's feet. Then we finish up these items with a simple highlight of pure necrotic flesh. Painting miniatures by stippling colors into place using a dry brush is a new technique that I've added to my repertoire while painting these Grimcoven miniatures. I'm using army green to stipple over the ground as well as using it to muck up the skeleton a bit. I continue this process with ochre yellow. I have less paint on the brush this time, so I don't inadvertently cover all of the army green. I also believe that I washed in some very thin German Camel Black Brown to break up the consistency of the army green layer. The easiest and most satisfying part of this paint up is applying the rust effect. I warm the miniature, rust, and verdigris effect paints in front of a small space heater located on my painting desk. I keep the heater running as I paint the rust into place. I've tried this before without the space heater and the rust failed to bloom properly. Since I've started following this procedure, the rust has performed flawlessly. It's a very fast and easy way to get killer looking rust on your miniatures. I am a little less impressed with the Dirty Down verdigris. It blooms properly and performs just as effectively as the rust did, but to my eyes, the finished look of the verdigris isn't as convincing. I think this blue-green verdigris looks a little too dark for my taste, without enough variation in color as natural verdigris has. I've had better luck achieving great-looking verdigris effects using standard acrylic paints. I may be missing something with this first attempt at using Dirty Down verdigris, so I'll keep playing with it to see if I can improve the results. I use electric blue to finish up the bright objects on the backside of the Alchemist. I paint the pouches around the Alchemist belt with burnt orange. I apply this in a few layers, covering a little less area with each layer. This is all I'll do to create the look of highlights fading away into dark shadows. Then I use leather brown in the same way as the burnt orange on the Alchemist belts and other auxiliary items. All that's left to do is touch up the metallic items. I use Army Painter gunmetal to dry brush over all of the chains. I use cheap-ass bronze acrylic paint on the Alchemist's thorny halo and the bell-looking things hanging from his left arm. Basically, I'm using gunmetal on all of the rusty items and I'm using bronze on all of the verdigris bits. This wraps up painting the Elite Alchemist for Grimcoven. I hope you enjoyed watching this paint up as much as I enjoyed painting it. I'd like to thank my generous channel members for supporting the work that I put into these videos. You too can become a channel member using the link in the description and receive perks such as early access to videos, extended versions of our painting tutorials, and even a tier that lets you decide which miniature I paint next. Thank you so much for watching. Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel to join our growing community of painters.